Comes into picture when we start thinking about cloud native. And I can say that this is more like a precursor of learning Docker or Kubernetes, because unless you don't know what you're trying to solve, learning those technologies probably will get you ahead in the technology aspect. But when it comes to solving problems, you'll start finding the same question. Hey, I see Kubernetes so stuff. It is
Absolutely.
so challenging. Why am I using Kubernetes? Because you went into Kubernetes without trying to understand the why part of it. And today we will try to cover the why part of it. And over the period of time, if you have any questions about specifically on cloud and what are the stuff that we are doing, I'll try to answer that. You can probably put your questions on the chat, and then we can try to cover once I'm through with the
Excellent.
slides.
Okay, go ahead, Satish. I think you have a great agenda. Uh,
Yeah. So
yeah.
one thing, right? So the first part about cloud native, if I have to say it in a sentence, what is cloud native? It's like you think about building an application once, but giving you the liberty of flexibility to deploy it anywhere, any number of times. I build my application on my laptop, but I should have the flexibility to put it on AWS cloud, Azure cloud, Google cloud, on my on-prem. That is the target state that we want to get into, and that is what cloud native technologies are working towards solving that problem. Earlier we have had challenges where I package application, run on my virtual machine, it works fine. When I go and put it in production, it starts failing because some dependencies are not available, and the developer's answer is, hey, it works on my machine. So that is how we have been used to. But today, with the advancement of containers and stuff, you can package your application, run it on a Docker host on your laptop, and I take that same container image, put it on Kubernetes or on Azure or on Google Cloud. I expect it to work the same way, because all the dependencies for my application are packaged in the container image. I don't now necessarily say that, hey, it was working on my machine, doesn't work on cloud. So we will talk about that. But before we go there, I think it is important to understand on what cloud offers, and how we can build application that can leverage these capabilities. So to start with, what are the different features that cloud offers? Why is cloud being so popular, or why is cloud being seen as a very important agenda when it comes to organizations, IT adoption or IT goals going forward? So first of all, one of the biggest factors that cloud offers is somebody else is managing infrastructure, but he has abundance of infrastructure that he is able to provide you on demand computing. You don't have to now plan for resources. You could say that, hey, when my user base is going to increase, with the number of requests I'm going to increase, I want to procure more hardware. Like I want, I want to create a deployment on, let's say, on India region with 100 virtual machine. I ask, let's say, Microsoft Azure Data Center, it is going to provide you that. So that hardware is already available. You don't have to go and build something new, procure all the infrastructure, and then start doing it. Earlier we used to do that. That would take at least 3 to 6 months just to get the infrastructure ready before even we think about putting the code. Today it is in a matter of writing a ARM template or a Terraform template which says, hey, these are the infrastructure I need, and I do a deployment and procures all the hardware for me in a matter of 15 to 30 minutes. That is the benefit. So resources are made available to user on the click of a button or an API call. That is the one of the biggest selling point of cloud. You can't achieve that on-prem because monetarily it is not possible. You can't keep thousands of servers just because someday somebody is going to come and ask you for the hardware and being able to share them or make it available within this point of 30 minutes. So that's where cloud providers like Microsoft and AWS and Google are really good at, but they have done that investment. Second aspect is resource pooling. Now, like I said, I can't say that, hey, my user base is currently I have 10 enterprises. Tomorrow I'm going to have 100 enterprises. I'm going to create copy of my infrastructure for each one of them. All they do is again, they're best at this because what they've done is they've created abundance of infrastructure and they made that infrastructure available as a pool. So when somebody comes and says that, hey, I need 100 virtual machines for running my workload, he's going to take from the available resource pool and say that, okay, these 100 virtual machines are available to you. He's not creating a totally unique data center for that enterprise. If another startup comes and says, hey, I'm doing a small application, I just need 5 virtual machines for my workload. I'm taking virtual machine as an example, but then he again goes to the pool and tries to identify, okay, what are the available resources, and provide it to the user or the customer accordingly. So they work on this multi-tenant model where resources are made available or procured from the available resource pool that they have already created. The third biggest benefit is pay-per-use. Now, I used to call this as, or we used to call this capital expenditure versus operational expenditure. Traditionally, when you build a on-premise hardware or infrastructure, you go and procure all your hardware for the foreseeable future. Say, okay, I will make a $100,000 investment to build my data center, which has this much of hardwares and stuff. But when do you see real, usage of that production? Is only during some peak sale period, like Diwali or some other festive season, is when your load is going to go higher. But during that entire time, where about 80% of the time your hardware is not fully getting utilized, but you've already paid the amount. So you're basically paying about 80% of cost for something that's not getting used. And what cloud became is, with the ability of on-demand computing and scalability and stuff, they said, hey, you whenever you're starting, say, like, today is not a holiday season, so I will go with just 10 servers. But when Thanksgiving comes, I want to scale it out to 1,000 servers. So I just want to have 1,000 servers only during the Thanksgiving period, which means only for those 2 or 3 days when Thanksgiving is happening, I pay for 1,000 servers. For rest of the days, I pay only for 10 servers, because my hardware is going to scale up and down accordingly. So then what happens is, my usage, what I'm paying is only for what I'm using and not for what I've procured. And that's a huge cost saving for enterprises. And that's one of the biggest selling factor for cloud as well. Now, the other aspect is broad access network. Now, you may have already seen, with the ability of cloud, you can create your data center or a set of applications on North America, but you could still access them from India. You can upload data to your application that is running in North America. It is accessible from across the world, wherever you want, wherever internet is available. That is the reach that these cloud service providers are made available. It is not that my application is deployed in North America and I can only use it in my data center or office premises within that particular region. And security is one bigger aspect. So we have seen issues around, um, there are multiple data breaches or other hacking related issue that is happening, and we are often required to keep updating our software with the latest security patches in order to get away from those kind of vulnerabilities. Now, these can have a huge cost. Sometimes if due to data theft, you lose all your customer data, all your information about their bank details and stuff. It has a huge security breach for the customer. Sometimes you lose your personal data as well. People get access to your photos and stuff. So it is very important that we need to make our hardware or our infrastructure as up to date as possible, and to make sure that we can get away from the security vulnerabilities. And cloud service providers are always updating their hardware and their infrastructure, applying latest patches to the operating system to make sure whatever you're getting is the safest or the most secure option that is available for your application. And also on top of that, they provide additional capabilities like role-based access control, end-to-end TLS, securing your data at rest with encryption, and all that stuff comes out of the box. You don't have to really build anything to avail those capabilities. You just have to use it based on certain configuration that you do, and that ensures that your application, not just the infrastructure, but your application that is hosted on that infrastructure, is also secure. And scalability, we briefly talked about it. So I can depend on the incoming request, a number of users accessing my application, or the queue, the depth of my queue of the orders that I want to process. I can determine whether I want to scale out or scale in. When I say scale out, it is adding more instances of the hardware or my application so that it can process faster. And scale in is basically bringing down the number of instances to say that, hey, I'm now in back to normal load, so I don't want to scale. Typical use case, when you see Hotstar, during IPL season, Hotstar demand goes really high. And based on the number of users that are logging in, they are able to scale to those many additional servers to make sure that the user doesn't see any lag when they are watching that game. And once the IPL game goes down, then the number of users have logged off, then the load automatically scales in to only the nominal capacity which is needed for that given point of time. So you can do this loading or scalability based on a specific time or specific event, or based on the number of users requesting your service. And ease of maintenance. So most of the operational overhead has already been taken care by the cloud providers. You don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. You don't have to worry about OS patching, security patching, and stuff. All you need to make sure is making sure that my application is up to date. I'm able to apply bugs and fixes or latest version of my code to the to the production environment, and you don't really have to worry about how the underlying infrastructure is handled, because that is all taken care by the cloud providers. They do everything automatically, and you don't really have to worry anything. Even your virtual machine gets restarted or replaced without you having to know about it. And that's one of the flexibility they provide. Cost management. So you really want to, when you do capex, or when you do the original infrastructure, you have already procured based on demand. You decided, okay, this is the investment I'm going to put, and these many hardwares I will receive. But once you move into cloud, because of the pay-per-use model, you will keep consuming resources, but you need to have a way to determine how much I'm actually using, how much I'm actually spending on the cloud. Is there any way I can efficiently determine that I can bring down the cost of my usage on the cloud? And they have provided a lot of tools that can give you recommendation saying that, hey, this particular virtual machine hardware is used only 10% of the time, and about 90% of the time it is not getting used. You could turn it off. So it give you recommendation. So you can determine, oh, okay, when I turn it off, I will get about 80% of saving on that particular infrastructure. So maybe I'll take some automation to automatically shut down that machine at midnight 12 o'clock, so that I don't incur that additional cost. But it also generates you reports and other information which says which resource, which location, or which region is consuming more cost. So if there is any optimization that you want to do, you can do based on the reports that is provided. So this kind of things is very handy for enterprises, because at some point of time, IT costs, recurring IT costs becomes a concern. You really want to know where you're exactly spending, so that you can make your investment very well. Resiliency and availability. This is a very important aspect of moving to cloud. Now, one thing to understand is, because the hardware is not managed by you, is managed by cloud provider, and he is going to do the upgrade and patching and the security updates for you. He may decide to take a virtual machine down at any point of time without giving you a prior information. He may be upgrading a hardware, or a hardware went down because of power fluctuation, and he is, in that case, he is providing a replacement hardware. And these things are not controllable by you're not going to ask thousands of customers saying that, hey, my hardware your hardware is going down, shall I put you on maintenance? That's not going to happen. So your application should be smart enough to understand, when a virtual machine underlying infrastructure goes down, I should be able to go and replace my hardware or move my application to another instance, which is provisioned for me automatically by the cloud provider, so that for my users I don't have any downtime. You can't go back and tell your user saying that, hey, you are not able to see the Hotstar page because AWS is down, or Azure on this particular region is down. You should be smart enough to determine that, okay, if a particular region is down, or if a particular set of hardware infrastructure is down, how can I automatically fall back to or fail over to another data center or another region, and make sure that my service is unaffected. So they provide a resiliency and availability by factor that for each type of service, he's going to say, I will ensure that that API is available 99% of the time. Whenever you want a VM, we will provide you a VM. If something goes wrong, we will spin up a new VM for you. But how you utilize that VM is something that is up to you. We should not take it to granted that, hey, my machine went down because Azure was doing a restart, so I have a downtime. That is not acceptable in the cloud environment. We need to make sure that we are working through those situations, and making sure that the application is up always. And finally, the measured service aspect. This is about what tools or what capabilities are available, so that I can monitor how my application is performing on the cloud. And I also can determine that, okay, at what point of time I need to probably add more capabilities or more resources to make sure my application is performing even better. So if you see that a particular set of virtual machines are always 80 or 90% capacity, probably you're not using the right virtual machine type. Your application may be high memory intensive, but the virtual machine that you ordered could be high on CPU but less on memory. So in that case, you will start seeing performance degradation. But these tools help you. If you find that out, they'll show you that, okay, memory of this particular virtual machine has been 90% for about 80% of the time. So maybe you should upgrade to a better virtual machine. So then you can determine, okay, what is the right virtual machine, right size that I should pick in order to make sure that my application up and running. So these are some of the capabilities that cloud provides. And why it is important to understand this is, when I start building or moving my application onto cloud using the cloud native capabilities, I want to make sure that we are leveraging these features to its fullest. So there is a notion of cloud, something called as cloud hosted, where you or enterprise or your company is right now putting the code in virtual machines, VMware or something on your on-prem, and all you're trying to do is, instead of using your on-prem VM, you will procure a VM on the cloud and just migrate your application and put on and make it run on that cloud infrastructure. But that doesn't leverage all the capabilities that cloud provides. For example, like I said, if your load is going high, how do you dynamically decide that I want to scale my application? So is your application meeting the scaling requirement? Or if your virtual machine is going down, how do you make sure that I need to now move my application to a new instance or a healthy instance so that my user doesn't have a downtime? So those kind of capabilities are not fully leveraged by the cloud hosted application. And that is why the notion around cloud native is becoming popular, where these are applications that leverage the cloud capabilities to its fullest and make sure that you are benefiting from the features that the cloud is providing. So now moving on, so how this whole aspect of cloud native comes, it was not something that was already available, right? It evolved over a period of time. Like I said, we started with non-virtualized hardware, virtual machines on, or just hardware CPUs where our code was running until 2000. And then VMware came in 2001, where they came up with this whole concept of hyper virtualization, where uh, you have a hardware and you have another Hyper-V layer on top of it, and that will allow you to create multiple virtual machine on the same hardware. And that provide you flexibility around the dependency on the hardware has gone taken care by your VMware, but you can procure as many virtual machines depending on your requirement on top of the VMware capability. And that got evolved in 2006 when Amazon started, and they launched out this capability saying IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, where they said, hey, you don't worry about infrastructure, we will provide you infrastructure on demand. That's when the cloud era started. They said, hey, uh, I will provide you virtual machine at any point of time. You only pay for what you're using, and your virtual machine will be the latest, using the most recent OS updates and security patches and stuff. And that's the capability that Amazon started at 2006, called IaaS. And then around 2018 or 2019, the whole capability of PaaS came into picture. Sorry, 2008 or 2009, where they said, okay, you have the virtual machine, you used to move your SQL server to your VMs on cloud, but again you have the same problem. It is hosted on cloud, but it's not truly leveraging the capability that cloud provided. So what PaaS meant is, the cloud provider started creating instance of cloud or SQL server on the cloud and fully managed by the cloud provider. You just have to use the service for your application. So if you say, I need a database, you can ask AWS to create a SQL server for you, and it will automatically put a database for you on that server. You don't have to manage the server. You don't have to manage the SQL server versions. You're just responsible for the database schema and putting data onto it. That is the platform. So they created SQL Server platform on top of the existing infrastructure layer that they provided, and they called it as PaaS. Similarly, there were open source capabilities came into picture, like Amazon started, but then Red Hat had their own version of IaaS, which customers can use to build their data centers, cloud like data centers on their on-prem as well. And similarly, open source PaaS also came, where Pivotal was one of the first PaaS providers for building microservices on cloud. They said, hey, you use Cloud Foundry, you don't worry about the underlying infrastructure and stuff. We will make sure that your application is scalable, resilient, available. You just provide your code and provide certain configuration, then we will determine, we'll take care of it. So moving away from the whole cloud hosted concept to with platform as a service, they said we will make sure that you're leveraging the cloud features efficiently. And then the concept of containers came, because until uh, containers came, we were still packaging applications that were running on virtual machines, and all the dependencies for that application need to be present on the virtual machine. Otherwise, your application might not run. Then the same problem that I mentioned earlier, things used to work on the developer machine, but when it gets deployed on the cloud, on the production environment, on the test environment, because of a missing dependency, it wouldn't work. So whatever effort that we put, zero value now, because that particular dependency was missing on the environment. Now with container concept, what happened is they created one more virtualization layer on top of your operating system, and they said now the container package can contain not just your application code, but also your application dependencies, like the libraries and stuff that you use, and the base OS that your application will be running on, whether it's Linux or Windows. And then we can package everything in the container. Now, this container can be hosted on your desktop, or on-prem, or on any cloud environment. And whenever you're running it on a container runtime, it is going to behave the same way. When you, like, Docker is a container runtime. If you run it on Docker desktop on your Windows, and if you run on Docker D, which is a container runtime on Azure, it is going to run the same way, because all the dependencies are already present in the container image, and your application is going to start using it. And even capabilities like scalability and resiliency also became easier, because something goes down, I just bring down that container, spin up a new instance of the container, and everything is up and running as good. Now finally in 2015, this whole there are a lot of open source companies or products that came into picture, that started to leverage the potential of cloud, and started building applications that truly adopt the features that cloud offers. And that's when the notion of cloud native started. And Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF, was the primary member which defined what a cloud native application should look like. And then it included a huge stack of open source softwares and tools which help you build these cloud native applications on either your hybrid cloud, or on public cloud, or on your private cloud as needed. And by definition, what they say is your application are basically segmented into smaller microservices, and they get packaged into their own container. And then the whole deployment and management of your application is done in an automated manner, instead of having to do things manually, because that is how you can take the potential of cloud. That was the whole notion behind cloud native. And so coming back to that same point, what is cloud native? It's basically an agile approach to create applications for cloud. And what it says is how I can design my application in a way where it can leverage the scale and the resilience that the cloud offers, and being able to make changes rapidly. Like, now when I say changes rapidly, I don't have to wait every 3 or 6 months to release a new version of code to my production environment. I should be able to release things much faster, maybe every sprint, which is basically 2 weeks, or every month. I should be able to release a new version of my software or a particular microservice, depending on the capabilities that I'm offering. And we will talk about that in the following slides. Second is how I can develop this application that are packaged as containers and deployed as microservices, so that it's management of the services on the cloud infrastructure is taken care of, and the whole deployment of these microservices is driven by a DevOps process and continuous delivery workflows like GitLab or GitHub Actions and stuff, which provide you the capability to orchestrate how your application gets built, tested, and then deployed into the target environment, so that you don't have to have any manual intervention. So that's how it is categorized. Cloud native talks about 4 specific areas: microservices, containers, DevOps, and finally continuous delivery. You may have already heard about these stuffs. I'll briefly talk about what these capabilities are just as a refresher before we move on to the landscape of different tools and technologies that's available in cloud native world. So you might have heard microservices multiple times. So it's basically traditionally we had this whole one monolith application. When I say monolith, it is this huge application stack. You call it as 3-tier, 2-tier, or n-tier, and all the UI logic will be in one particular layer. All the backend logic will be in one particular business layer, and all the data is shared in one common database. Now, the challenge with that approach was whenever you have to issue a new version or make a change, your entire stack has to get tested, and it becomes so challenging to make sure that your changes are applied in a much faster time. So you have to wait for say 3 months for every release, and that 3 months of time gives you the ability to not just test the change that you did, but also to make sure that the changes that you're doing is not breaking anything else. So we used to have this word. Regression. So the whole regression thing happens because of the monolithic architecture where I change an API and suddenly I don't realize what else is it affecting. I change the schema on my database, I don't know what is affecting that particular database. And as the application starts getting bigger and bigger, it becomes a much challenging a nightmare to be able to deliver and scale, and being able to make things much faster on the cloud. If you take an e-commerce application like Amazon, if you do it monolithic way, they will not be able to add new features every day. If they want to say, hey, I want to do Amazon Pay UPI payment service to Amazon, and if I have it in monolith, it takes me 3 months to release their capability, and by then customer may have been probably adopted Google Pay as their preferred payment option, and Amazon Pay would have been in class. So what enterprises or customers are looking at is how can I release capabilities much faster. Time to market should be much faster, because if I don't do it sooner, somebody else is going to take the place. So microservices enable you to be ready to market faster, and these microservices are highly scalable because it is only this it's a small piece of code which targets a specific functionality. They are self-contained with all its dependencies needed, and and things about deployment and other capabilities of this microservice can be automated. So what I can do is I can say for my let's say payment service, I launched a new payment capability. Initially they were only limited use of Amazon Pay, but people started liking Amazon Pay so much, and they started leveraging Amazon Pay for much like for more requests. And now as my requests are increasing, I should be able to scale only that particular payment service, not the other part of my components. I was able to do that with microservices. If it was monolith, everything is deployed on one virtual machine. So if my payment component is getting more demand, I have no choice to scale only that component. I have to add more virtual machines in order to be able to meet the demand for that particular smaller component. So with microservices, I can individually scale specific components that are services that are requiring more demand. And resilient. Now, this is also important. So when I deploy a payment service, I can say that, hey, I will always have 3 copies of my services, and I will put a load balancer up on top of it. So whenever my one of the instance of my service goes down, my other instances are still handling the request, and these services instances are spread across multiple machines. So if something goes wrong, the failed virtual machine will be replaced by a new one, but other instances of my microservice is still running in those different instances which are healthy, and my application is still up and running. And meanwhile, when the new hardware or new VM is available, I will reinstantiate or create a new instance of my payment service on that available instance. So I can make my application resilient with help with microservices. And this can happen only for one particular service, not the entire application stack that you have. And it becomes easier to deploy. Now, if I have an application that has 50 microservices, earlier we used to have this problem with monolith. Your build takes 3 hours or 4 hours because it has to build the whole application, run the entire unit test, and then regression test and all that stuff. With the microservices, I just have to test every microservice is managed in a separate repository, and it has all its dependencies and tests as part of it. Whenever I make a change, I run the build package and test of that particular microservice, so my code is available for deployment in a matter of 1 or 2 minutes, and I can deploy it into the dev or test or whichever environment that's needed. Guys, you can access it in your preferred protocol and stuff, and make sure that it's providing the needed response as required. And it is also more open in a way that it doesn't restrict you from deciding which tools you want to use. You can build your microservice using Java or JavaScript, Node.js basically, or you could build it using Python or Go. Go is getting popular right now, and there are multiple other technologies that you can use for building your microservices. You can build it as a REST API, or you can build it as a gRPC, which is Google's RPC protocol. And these are making it gives you option to decide, depending on the nature of my application. I can determine what language, or depending on the developer community that I have in my organization, I can determine what language and what tools I will use for building my microservices application. And the second part of it is containerization, which is also like it's an extension of microservice, right? Okay, I built a microservice. Now I want to be able to deploy it anywhere, so that I can, just build it once and, deploy it in any place that I need. And that's where the concept of containerization came into picture. And if you see the name container, it's derived from the shipping containers. So they all have similar size, they have look similar, and all that is needed to be transported or put inside that container. And this container can be moved from a truck to a train to a ship, depending on what transport mechanism it needs. And you can consider each vehicle as an environment. Your truck can be a development environment, your train can be your test environment, and your ship can be your production environment. So the container is going to work or transport the goods the same way, irrespective of which vehicle you're putting in. And similarly, container gives you the flexibility where it is portable across multiple environment. It is deployable faster because I just have to do a simple Docker run command, and that automatically takes uh, what is the entry point for my service and spin up the service immediately. There is no long boot time for your virtual machine and stuff. Your virtual machine is already available. You just instantiate a new copy of your container image. It is shareable. So if you see, most of the Docker container images are shared in public registries like Docker Hub or Google Container Registry or Microsoft Container Registry, so that others could use it. You can keep it private or you can make it public. So when I think I've built a generic reusable component, I want to make it open source, I can publish it to a Docker registry and anyone can pick it up. That's how most of the open source code is delivered as well. And it is reusable. So because it is meant for a specific functionality, if I need that particular functionality, I can install that Docker without having to do any changes. It is reusable as it is. I can scale it to multiple instances as I need, depending on my load or depending on the resiliency I need. And the Docker images are versioned. So I can say I'm releasing version 1.1 right now, and after a week I have version 1.2 available. So I can determine which version of my Docker image or container image that I want to deploy, so that I know what functionality is running or what capability is provided. And it also provides me a way to do something called rolling upgrade on a cloud environment or a production environment where I have version 1.1 running, and I also want to deploy the newer version. I want to test the newer version with some part of the request, so that if something fails, I can determine whether to roll out the change or to roll back as required. So and that way, the benefit of this is the user experience is not affected. User still sees the application up and running. For some part of the users, maybe there was an error, and due to that error, you rolled back the change, but there is no downtime when you're applying changes to your production. Isolation, so whatever affects happens in that container affects only that container. It doesn't affect your other containers. It's isolated that way. And the underlying virtual machine can try to bring down one container instances if it is behaving uh, uh, weirdly, without having to affect the rest of your application that is running on that infrastructure. It is immutable. So once you're created a container image, you cannot change that image. You can create a new version of it, but you cannot change the existing version. So you always know version 1.1 is going to behave like this. If I pass X, it's going to generate Y. It is not going to generate Z. And finally, it is DevOps friendly. Like I called out few cases like rolling upgrades or automated build and test, and scaling and all that stuff can be done easily using container images. And that's why container becomes the core building block for building a cloud native application. And the third important point is, so one is when I start thinking about cloud native, first is I think about building it as a microservice. Then I determine that, okay, I will now package it as a container image because it can be deployed anywhere, and it has many other benefits. But the third important aspect is I don't want to be able to do things manually. I want things to be much more automated manner, and not just the development cycle, but the entire life cycle of your application. And in a normal team, you would see you'll have a development team, a testing team, a production team, and a support team, which is doing multiple aspects. Development team is writing the code, testing team is validating if things are doing good, and there's a deployment team or release team which is basically deploying it to the production environment, and there's a support team which is monitoring how the application is running. But often the challenge is these teams work in silos. They don't work in like one single team. And what happens is, due to that reason, the time for a particular change or improvement to get applied back onto the application takes a long time, because they don't have clear communication between each other. So what DevOps as a process came into picture is, it was a cultural change where it said teams which working as part of a certain application have to have open collaboration. They need to have a clear definition of what each team is doing, and also define few tools and technologies using which you can automate most of the capabilities. It also came up with some processes around I can have a Scrum team which has not just my development but also test and other teams also part of it, so that they know what change is coming through, so that they can plan their testing and their deployment efforts accordingly. So for example, development team did a change, they didn't inform the deployment team about the change, so deployment team doesn't know how to apply the new change, and it affect the whole again time to market aspect. So now with the DevOps process, what happens is your deployment team knows when the development team is making a change. So while they are making application code changes, your deployment team is basically writing the scripts needed to automate the deployment aspect, so that the whole experience becomes smoother. And right from your development environment, testing environment, till the way all the way to production, the deployment is automated using capabilities like CI/CD and other stuff. And not just there, now the monitoring also becomes into picture, because the support team which is monitoring your application can look into the behavior anomalies that's happening on cloud, and then based on that determine, hey, something going wrong, your resource utilization going high, I think you should probably change or do some fixes. They provide the input, it goes back to the development team takes it as part of a sprint, make a change, release a new version, and the new version gets applied in a week or two. So that way there's a continuous change that is getting applied. So DevOps basically talks about the culture of how these different teams can collaborate with each other, what are the processes available to make sure that this information and collaboration is smooth, and the release becomes in much more automated manner, and what tools are provided to make developer and the teams job easier. And finally, continuous delivery. So it's more like an extension of DevOps, you can say, but the focus here is I want to be able to deploy or automatically build, test, and deploy software that can be released to production at any point of time. It is not like I only after 3 months my application can deploy it. Come back to the same point. We have to change our mindset from having to deploy or release a product every 3 months to being able to release a product at any point of time. And that's where Agile also comes. What Scrum talks about is I need to have a actionable product at the end of every sprint. So now I should be able to determine whether I can deploy this application to my production environment at the end of a sprint or not. That way, you have newer capabilities, newer fixes, some issue that occurred, and you want to release a fix, you can release that fix immediately because you have that entire pipeline which automatically build, test, and deploy a software. And that's the whole notion of CI/CD tools like GitHub Actions or GitLab CI or Azure DevOps. They are building or providing capabilities which allow you to build continuous integration and continuous deployment pipelines that makes your release process much more streamlined and faster to production. So you get capability like automated release, improved developer productivity. Now, the whole build, test, and deploy is a repetitive action, right? Once you have defined set of tests, you have to run the test every time whenever there's a change, but you don't have somebody to do it manually. All of this can be automated by the tool, so the developer can focus on writing the code and let the pipeline take care of things. And quality is improved because every time there's a change applied, my unit tests are going to run, my regression tests are going to run. They're going to make sure that my application is not breaking. And then you're also able to deliver things faster because of the way everything is chained together. So that's the whole summary of, when you have to think about cloud native, the set of features that cloud provides. But in order to truly leverage the features that cloud provides, you need to make sure that your application is a microservice based application and it is packaged as containers. You are adopting DevOps model to make sure that there is a continuous process for making this change and applying the change. And there's a delivery pipeline, CI/CD pipeline, which takes care of build, test, and deploy of your application in an automated manner. I know we are running out of time, so I'll try to wrap it up sooner. So this screen basically gives you an overview of the different tools that we have in the cloud landscape. So you have for the application side, cloud native, you can use all these different language and frameworks. These are different open source databases that are supported. For streaming, you have different capabilities, Kafka or Spark streaming that can be used. For source code management, you have GitHub, GitLab, and similarly for CI/CD, you have Jenkins. Any of this can be used for building cloud native application. That's the whole aspect. Cloud native is not restricted to any specific language or technology. You can choose anything that's available here. And for your platform, Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is the de facto standard right now, or platform for hosting microservices which are deployed as containers. So the whole container orchestration is taken care by Kubernetes. Swarm and Mesos were other capabilities, but there's a lot of focus only on Kubernetes right now. And CNCF is making sure that the Kubernetes is there are new capabilities added every frequently to the Kubernetes release. And from a cloud provider perspective, you have Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS, which is providing you the environment where it can be run. And these are different Docker runtimes that are supported. Docker and Containerd are the most prominent ones. And similarly, from a infrastructure automation perspective, you could use Terraform. You can use CloudFormation for AWS or ARM template for Azure. For configuration management, you can use Ansible or Chef. And similarly, for making sure that your application is secure, your Docker images are coming from secure source, you can use tools like Aqua, which will do that. And the underlying cloud infrastructure is provided by multiple cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, IBM, DigitalOcean, Oracle. There are so many players which provide the cloud infrastructure. So you can choose anyone to host your cloud native application. It is not restricted to only Amazon or Azure. And that's the benefit of it. When I go, let's say I started with Azure and I want to go to AWS, it becomes much easier for me to do the entire thing. And the next one is, this is a sample application. I don't want to go in deep. You can take a look at it. It shows how different microservices are deployed using different technologies, how they are packaged as a Docker container, what are different streaming tools that they've used, what are the other components they've used for API management, for monitoring, what tools have used. You see Grafana, Prometheus. These are popular tools for monitoring. For databases, you have some capabilities available. For deployment, automated deployment, you have Jenkins, you have Helm, you have Terraform, and then finally for data layer, you have Hadoop and other data analytics platform that you need. So this is just a reference implementation of how different cloud native tools and technology that you see in the previous slide can be leveraged for building a cloud native application, which is truly hybrid and multi-cloud ready. And finally, recap, like I said, you have on-demand provisioning, you have elasticity that the cloud provides. You can take advantage of that. And then you are just building cloud services instead of hosting the infrastructure yourself. So everything is taken care by them. and your applications are designed to be tolerant failure. Like whenever there's a failure, you automatically respin a new instance. There's no downtime for user, and then you're building using latest software practices like CI/CD, DevOps, test-driven development, and stuff. And from architecture perspective, you will adopt microservices, service mesh, Kubernetes for deploying your code. And finally, the speed or the benefit that you get is like speed of delivery, scalability of your application, resiliency from faults, and then agility, being able to make changes more frequently are some of the benefits. And you can read more about Cloud Native Foundation here. And I've also provided some links of how Cloud Native application can be built on GCP, Azure, and AWS. For a starter, you can take a look at these links. And basically, the summary is, you adopt Cloud Native to basically increase your efficiency, productivity, and accelerate your application development to the cloud. So that summary, I know it was a lot. I had to speak, but the intent is to make sure that you understand what is cloud native development and what these tools could provide before you go ahead and start developing, because only then you will start leveraging the true power of cloud.
Hey Satish, Bhupalan here. Hi.
Hey, Bhupalan.
Yeah, so that was a wonderful session. You started from the very basic and took us through the journey of cloud computing to this very moment and where the real advancements that are happening. That was a very wonderful session. Thanks for that. And we will open up the chat window for questions, and we can take some couple of questions. So I have a personal question here. So, so what are the typical application these days look like? So, for example, if you are developing an e-commerce application, so what are the basic suggestions in all these life cycles? So how does the tech stack look like? Where's the most stuff happening?
Yeah, from a development perspective, okay, like I said, everything is built as microservices. So if you take e-commerce, you have ordering service, you have a payment service, you have a cart service, you have your delivery service, and there are multiple other services that are available. Each of these services are not built by one team. There are different teams managing different services, and they choose their own tech stack. Your order service could be built using Node.js. Your delivery service could be built using Golang, whereas your payment service is built using Java, because there's a team that is comfortable doing that in Java. So you could build application any language that you choose, and then everything is from the moment code is written. The deployment of the code is driven via an automated CI/CD pipeline. Your code is committed to Git repository. Git repository triggers a CI pipeline, either using GitHub Actions or Jenkins, that takes care of pulling the latest code, build and convert it into container image, and then they run test suite on that container image, make sure that everything is up and running the way it's expected. And finally, if you have a target environment, it'll automatically go and deploy it to the target environment. And that process will continue not just for your payment service, but for all the other microservices. And when it goes to the target environment, these services are configured in a way that they could talk to each other using an API method, or the way it is configured to talk to each other.
Okay. Thanks.
And one important thing is, not each of the services has to go to production at the same time.
Right.
Each service could go at their own timelines. Depending on a use case, it would talk to other service, get the necessary capability. So I can release a payment service, but do not have my order service use the new Amazon Pay capability until my the order service is updated to use the new capability. So I don't have to wait for both the teams to wait to get the capabilities done.
Great, thanks. So I have one other question from from the set of pre-submitted questions earlier. So, for example, you talked about zero downtime, right? So,
Yep.
like, how do we handle when there are certain requests that are ongoing already? So, how do we switch? How do we handle? How do we make that? For example, let's say there are 5 or 6 servers that are handling the requests in parallel currently. So what are the deployment strategies there?
Okay. Yeah, with Kubernetes, this has been there before as well, but most often we would have heard about rolling deployments, where you have a version, you issue a new version, and it'll upgrade your existing version with the new code that you have. But the challenge there is, if something goes wrong, you have to roll back the entire version. So there's a downtime that can occur. The rollback may not be smooth enough also. There are other deployment models that are getting popular now. They are called as blue-green deployment. The other one is called as canary deployment. Now, what blue-green deployment says is you can have two versions of the code deployed side by side, and you can determine whether your request will flow to version 1 or version 2. And depending on that, if version 2 is not giving you the expected response, you can roll back all the requests to version 1. It's just a flip of your request. You can say that request, instead of getting routed to V2 API, go to V1 API. So for a user, there is not much big downtime because only your routes are getting changed. With Canary, it is even different. What Canary does is you deploy again two versions side by side, but you only pass 10% of the workload to Canary deployment, whereas rest of the 90% is going to your existing version, production version. And we have capabilities like Istio Service Mesh, which does this traffic management, intelligent traffic management, where you can send a configuration to Istio saying that, hey, pass 10% to my Canary deployment and keep 90% here. It will automatically do the routing of your, or doing load balancing accordingly. And slowly you can start increasing from 10 to 30% to 60% to 100%. And depending on the observation that you see in your monitoring, right, whether there are errors occurring, whether the performance is good or bad, you can determine whether to continue with Canary or to shift all the traffic back to your existing version in production. So these are some ways where you can apply new changes to production without having any downtime. Again, here we are not talking about all the entire application. We are talking about only one microservice. I'm issuing a new version of my microservice. Let's say Amazon API, Pay. I'm introducing a new version which allows to use RuPay credit card. Now I can have that request. Only 10% of users use that RuPay capability, whereas 90% still don't have it available. Based on the success factor of the 10%, I can determine whether I want to roll it widely or not. This is just an example.
Thank you. There's one more question from the audience. What is your experience while scaling on Azure, especially Redis caches in past documents when compared to VM-based caches in databases?
So, sorry. Redis on Azure is a PaaS service. So Azure takes care of the capability fully. And for me, scaling Redis on Azure is much easier because I can determine based on the load performance metrics, right? I have a monitor or I have a threshold that I've defined, and that threshold will keep sending some alerts. Whenever the alert is received, I have Azure function that reads that alert and then determines, oh, should I scale my Redis infrastructure or not? So I have the capability now, a set of tools that are connected, which gives me feedbacks that help me determine that, oh, for this particular load, I need to probably have X number of instances. So I will run an automation code that will go and procure additional Redis instances. And all of this scaling is managed or provided by Azure. So this is done without having any downtime. I have no experience on on-prem Redis, but again, there, if you have to scale, you have to add new virtual machine, you have to bring it to your worker node cluster. You want to make your master aware of the new node, and I don't know if there will be any downtime when you do that. But because Redis is a PaaS service, Azure automatically does it for us.
Thank you.
One question, Satish. So these Dockers can be used in multi-cloud environments. For example, in say you can have some services on PaaS and some services on on IaaS, right?
Yes.
So can we use, say, for example, IaaS I would like to move, because PaaS it's difficult because they may be closely tied with Azure, for example. Now some services I can take work with AWS and Azure. We can do multi-cloud kind of setup and still use Docker for movement and all.
Yes. So when you say platform as a service, there is not much that you can change because he's providing the capability for you.
Correct.
He's just giving you an API endpoint where you can interact with.
Guys.
Yes.
Correct.
For your application, as long as you are following the DevOps principle or the microservices and the containerization principles, as long as you containerize it, you can convert it into a Docker image, you can deploy the Docker image or have it run anywhere. Just that if your Docker image needs Postgres, on your on-prem, you will have your hosted Postgres. On Azure, you'll have Azure PostgreSQL. On AWS, you'll have AWS Postgres instance. Or in Google, they call it as Google BigQuery or something. So, or Cloud SQL, I guess. So depending on the service, your API will remain the same. Your application code should determine that what API will I use. As long as I use regular connection string approach to connect to Postgres or other databases, irrespective of where my database is hosted, doesn't really make a difference for my application. I just have to provide the correct connection string.
So all IaaS can be on Docker and moved wherever.
Not IaaS, your application code can be Dockerized. Yeah, right. Whatever is provided as a service like databases or messaging platform, they you use as platform because you don't want to rebuild, right? There's no point you putting effort in building the database. You will just write your core application code, just that you make your application code as a Docker image so it can be deployed on any environment. And on each environment, you will have your Terraform script in a way that it determines for AWS, I will procure a different Postgres, and for Azure, I'll procure a different Postgres.
That has to be handled by the scripts. Okay, right.
Your DevOps pipeline would basically do that.
Right. Okay. Great. Good. Thank you.
So I think one thing that's very important to understand is as you are moving to cloud, these terms like hybrid cloud or multi-cloud becomes much more prominent. So it is important when you start building your application, think from that perspective. Where my application is going to run, what is going to be my future state, not just for developers, but also for the architects, so that you can determine, should I use Azure SQL or should I use Azure Postgres? Because Azure SQL may be limited to only Azure, where Postgres is open source. I can use Postgres in Google or other places. Cosmos DB provides you document DB, but Cosmos DB is Azure's own implementation. You can use MongoDB as an option. So MongoDB is available in Azure. It can be deployed in Google Cloud as well.
Correct. Makes sense. Yeah.
And similarly for service bus or messaging, service bus you can use to go with Azure Service Bus, or you could use MQ, ActiveMQ, and you can determine whether you want to put another different environment. Again, it's not that I'm not recommending to go with Azure provided capabilities. Each cloud provider has its own capability, which is more matured. But if your intent is to go towards multi-cloud, you should be smart, or your architecture should be in a way that your application code doesn't have to change depending on which cloud environment you're hosting your code in. It should use the infrastructure just for the resources that you provide, like your compute and memory. It should run seamlessly in any of these environments.
Right, makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Satish, Tulsidharan here. It was a great session. Just have 2 quick queries.
Good.
So, Satish, when sometime back when we were scouting for any private cloud service providers from India, there weren't many major players other than AWS, Azure, Oracle, and off lately GCP is also in picture. But when it comes to a proper Indian-based cloud forming or cloud service providers, we weren't able to find, let's say, more than 5 or so. Is there any specific reason other than cost, or it's based upon the demand? What do you think from your point of view?
I think cost and scale is very important, right? So most of these companies have invested on cloud technologies from the beginning. Now, how they've been able to do it much faster is because their own application or their own services are running on it. Google made Kubernetes open source. Before making it open source, all the services were already running in Kubernetes. It's just that they made the whole container orchestration as open source, and then everyone started adopting it. So Kubernetes has an edge there. Sorry, Google has an edge there because they were using it probably 3 or 5 years before we started using it. So now, if Reliance has to say that, hey, I want to come with a Geo data center or a Geo service, he has to first of all, yeah, demand is important. Secondly, he has to see return of investment, right? Can I match the other cloud providers? Alibaba had a different advantage because China is like a walled garden. You can't put Azure or you can't put AWS or Google Cloud on it. So Alibaba could say that, hey, I will create my own cloud, which is within the China region. but that kind of liberty doesn't apply to India because India is open. You can use any cloud services available. That doesn't mean that it cannot come. There are a lot of players available on the IaaS space, I guess. But I see there's going to be a lot of challenge because the pace in which these cloud companies innovate are mind-blowing. I mean, Google made Kubernetes open source, and Google came with Kubernetes service, and there was demand for Kubernetes service. Immediately, AWS launched managed Kubernetes service, and 6 months later, Azure launched managed Kubernetes service. Now, if you as a service provider or a customer wants to evaluate a cloud provider, and you say that, hey, I want to put my code on Kubernetes because on-prem also I use Kubernetes, on cloud also I want to use Kubernetes for running my workloads. And if you see that Azure does not have a managed Kubernetes offering, immediately you will say that, okay, I'm not going to do that. So that scale, that speed, that agility is probably, I wouldn't say not possible, but it's going to be challenging.
So the second one is that this term called serverless computing, right? So
yes.
How different is that from cloud computing, and what is that one value add or edge over cloud computing when it comes to serverless computing?
The serverless computing is one more abstraction on top of what we discussed. We talked about monolith, converted into microservices, running on virtual machine or on bare metal virtual machines. And then it got converted to container so that you can deploy a code anywhere. Now, even with container, the challenge is for you to have the understanding of procuring, because everything has to run on a server. So you have to first get a server, put a code on top of it. In Kubernetes, even if you say I want to run my code on Kubernetes, you want to create a Kubernetes cluster first before you can deploy your application. So you run a Terraform script which procures your whole infrastructure on cloud before running your application. So now you have to make that initial investment, right? I need at least 3 servers for running a small workload. Serverless said is, what serverless is about is, they said, we will abstract about the concept of cluster management. There's no server involved. You just push your code, your container image to us. We will run it in our environment. We'll bring up a cluster, a virtual cluster for you. We'll run it. You don't have to worry. You just have to pay for how long your container is running. For example, they measure serverless by request, number of requests, and how long each request is running. They measure or they charge the customer based on that. So what it abstracted away is now I don't have to pay for a virtual machine. So if you look at the regular computing model, if I create a Kubernetes cluster with 3 virtual machines in it and 100 GB of storage, then I have to pay 3 times the virtual machine cost and 1 times the database or the storage cost. And then I can put my application on top of it. But there's no charge for the application now because I've already paid for the VM and paid for the storage. I'm not paying for my container or my application running on it. But with serverless, he says you don't pay for the infrastructure because I'm taking care of it. You only pay for how long your application is running. But there are differences. You can't make everything a serverless. Serverless has its own boundaries. It's generally meant for nano services, something which is only has specific tasks. Like you're putting a message, it needs to read that message and run an action. Serverless makes much more sense. You want to constantly do a background operation based on a certain event. Serverless may be a good option. Or whenever a request comes, you don't want an immediate response. As long as there's a cold start, you're okay to respond to your API later also. Like you can wait for about 2 minutes for your API response to come back. Once your function is started, it will respond faster. But initially, there may be a cold start time. There are issues that they are resolving, but it wouldn't. I can't say that I can move everything to serverless. There is a fine balance. Most of my custom workload, which has long-running processes, which has custom or some very tight integration or interactions with other services, I put them as microservices inside Kubernetes. Things that are standalone, much more repetitive or event-driven, I put them as serverless because they can only run for a specified period of time. They currently serverless has a limit of about 10 minutes, I guess. You can't have a long-running job running on serverless compute because they can't, that's how it is designed currently. So it's important to understand before you pick serverless on what use case I'm using it for. It is not that I use serverless because it's cool. It is meant for a purpose. So I assess what that reason or requirement is before I start using it.
Sure. That helps, Satish. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. We have one final question from the audience. Are there usually several Kubernetes clusters in an enterprise running all the applications load together, or does each application have their own clusters?
Yeah, I think it's a mix and match. It's a choice, right? Application teams, you could have one cluster that can run all the applications, and that is the maturity of your DevOps team. Also, if you say there's one single DevOps team and there are 10 teams that are building microservices, and each team is responsible for one microservice, I don't see having 10 clusters. I will have one cluster and 10 microservices running on it. But if there are 10 different application teams that are totally different from each other, they have their own product and their own service that they are controlling, and they have a different DevOps team that is responsible for it, then I think it's still okay to have a separate microservice for it. For example, Amazon, the whole e-commerce application will have a separate AKS cluster, could have a separate AKS cluster, and Amazon Prime, the video service, could have a separate AKS cluster. It need not be that entire Amazon organization to run in one Kubernetes cluster. There are some maintenance overhead, but that overhead is taken care by the DevOps team that each product has. But I wouldn't recommend having, if you have one product, 10 microservice, having one Kubernetes cluster for each microservice doesn't make sense. So it's depending on what your use case, what your application, or what your team, how your team is organized. And it doesn't mean that every team need to have a DevOps team. DevOps is basically, like I said, a mindset, right? So it's about, you don't need to have a dedicated person doing DevOps. My teams, we generally recommend the developer to write his own pipeline because he knows how the code should be executed. But some teams want the developers to focus on just writing code and somebody specialized to look into, how to automate things. So in that case, you can have one team that's specialized on DevOps related stuff, whereas the application team is focused on microservices.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, anybody, before we wrap this up? Okay, I think we've come to the end. Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
please.
thank you, Nikki. Yeah, I have provided my LinkedIn link here. So if you have any questions, about what we discussed today, I'll share this presentation as well. Feel free to reach out to me. And I also keep writing some posts about cloud native or my experiences on Azure and stuff. I'm starting to explore more on AWS and GCP as well, because if my organization wants to go multi-cloud, I don't want to start reading about multi-cloud at that point of time. I should be prepared so that I can give the right guidance. I think that's where we need to be. The purpose of this session also is from that angle, that the technology or the landscape is evolving. You see new products coming every now and then, and technologies get outdated very faster. And today nobody talks about VMs and stuff. People are only talking about Kubernetes, Docker, and that's a cool word, serverless, etc., etc. Now you go to a job interview and somebody asks you, hey, have you done serverless programming? And then you start thinking, it doesn't mean that you have to work on everything. It is important that you need to be aware of what it is, and you make a choice saying that, okay, for this particular use case, I will use serverless versus regular microservices based implementation. So I think that is where it is important for us to be aware on the technology trends, keep following CNCF, keep reading a lot about Kubernetes, Docker. It is how the market is going to evolve. Even serverless is going to change. Serverless today is specific to each cloud provider. AWS is called Lambda, Azure is called Functions, GCP is called its own cloud function. But the challenge is something that you written as Lambda cannot run as function, Azure Functions. That defeats the purpose of cloud native. My cloud native concept, like I said in the beginning, build once, deploy anywhere. So the current limitation that serverless provides with AWS Lambda or Azure Function is very tightly integrated to that cloud provider. So what Google is now doing with the help of Cloud Runners, they're telling you can build functions using your container images. So you can run it on Google Cloud and you can run on any other cloud as needed. So keep reading, keep yourself aware about the trends that are happening on the cloud. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Satish, so Suraj this side. So one questions regarding how you get updated on the tech area. Means what's coming next, what is a new in the market, which is a trend. So how you keep yourself updated?
I think LinkedIn is probably the best way to go, because there are so many blogs. You can't keep track of every blog. I've subscribed for so many blogs. Everyone sends a mail to my Gmail. I've stopped reading my Gmail, going through my Gmail. But when I go to LinkedIn, I follow so many peoples on the area that I'm working on. They like something, they comment something, they put something, it comes on my feed, and I find something is relevant to me. It's more like Facebook, what is relevant to you, right? With LinkedIn, I get content that is more relevant to me, and LinkedIn is mature enough that the more I read about something, the more trainings that I do in LinkedIn Learning, it knows that this is my area of interest. It only filters those content for me. There are some clutter in LinkedIn that can be avoided, but if you focus on, if your intent is to keep yourself updated, I think LinkedIn is that one single source where you get pretty much all the information. In fact, this week, CNCF's North America conference is going on, and all that information is available in LinkedIn. And you could subscribe, you can part of those events. There's something happen in India as well. I think, let me provide, I shared it in my LinkedIn. I think next week, the following week, Azure is running a developer conference in India. All the Azure MVPs are coming forward and talking about various capabilities on Microsoft Azure. I will share the link with Bhubalan and make it available to this audience, but you can please be part of it. And I think there'll be a lot of useful information that you'll get there.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Cool.
you so
I hope
much.
this was useful.
It was wonderful, Satish. There were too many questions. I do have some questions, but I'll send a note to you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Satish. It was a great session.
No problem.
Look forward to meeting you again at some point in time.
Yeah, sure. Next time I'll probably have some code. I didn't cover code because if I go too advanced, then defeats the purpose of understanding why we are doing things. The intent here is to understand why before we discuss about how we do it and what we're trying to implement.
Absolutely. We'll do a session 2 sometime, Satish, when you're available.
Definitely.
Yeah.
My next vacation maybe. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Satish.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Wonderful evening, guys.
Thanks, Satish.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Satish.